Evening, everyone. Tonight is Thursday, September 10th, 2020, and I'd like to welcome everyone to a special meeting of the Fitchburg City Council. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Please be advised that FATV is conducting audio and video recording of this meeting for public broadcast. And with that, I'd like to invite Councillor Van Huizinga to please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Councillor Van Huizinga, we'll unmute you.
Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Councillor. Madam Clerk, if you would please conduct the roll call. Oh, you're muted.
The following councillors have logged in and are present at tonight's meeting: President Kuchmarek, Councillor Boschman, Councillor Kucher, Councillor Di Natale, Councillor Fleming, Councillor Schultz, Councillor Squalia, Councillor Van Huizinga, Councillor Walsh, and Councillor Zarella.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We'll now hear a motion made by Councillor Zarella relative to remote participation.
I'd make a motion to suspend any and all rules of this body or of our parliamentary authority that are in conflict with either the remote participation format or the guidance of the state regarding remote participation during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Second.
I have a motion and second. This will be done by roll call. Councillors, just be aware, some of you are still muted. Madam Clerk.
Councillor Van Huizinga,
Yes.
Councillor Walsh,
Yes.
Councillor Zarella,
Yes.
President Kuchmarek,
Yes.
Councillor Boschman,
Yes.
Councillor Kucher,
Yes.
Councillor Di Natale,
Yes.
Councillor Fleming,
Yes.
Councillor Schultz,
Yes.
Councillor Squalia.
Yay.
That is unanimous.
Motion carries. Public forum. The public was advised to contact the City Clerk's office by noon today regarding any public comments, if not more than 2 minutes, for the opportunity to speak. None were brought to our attention this evening. Therefore, we have the warrants for a meeting, special meeting of the Fitchburg City Council on Thursday, September 10th, 2020 via Zoom meeting platform. Public comments was invited to register in advance. The agenda will consist of the mayor and finance team, who will formally present in detail the FY 2021 budget to the Fitchburg City Council. The budget and related orders below are 181 up to and including 189.20. Councilors, I won't read that at this time. And with that, I will, before I turn this over to our finance team to take us the rest of the way, just for folks' knowledge. So what will happen now is we'll turn this over to the finance team, who will give the mayor will give an introduction to the budget, and his finance team will take us department by department through the entirety of the budget. Councilors will, at the appropriate time after each budget section has been presented and spoken to, councilors will have an opportunity to ask questions to each respective aspect of the budget. This will not be an opportunity for statements beyond any statements or commentary, but simply questions about what the funds do and accomplish and how they appear in the budget. There will be an opportunity at the conclusion of the presentation this evening, following any questions from councilors and answers by the finance team. Each councilor will be permitted the opportunity to speak and provide commentary once before we conclude this evening. Councilors will then have an opportunity to formulate opinion and submit any budget cuts to the city clerk's office by September 17th. And then on September 22nd, will be an opportunity for department heads and the finance team to speak to any proposed cuts. The council will then have a full meeting of deliberation, discussion, and ultimately a vote on the budget orders that are before this body. With that said, I would like to welcome our finance team and hand this over to Mayor Di Natale. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. President, councilors, and Fitchburg residents. The process for achieving a balanced budget for FY21 was a challenge to complete, primarily due to the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, to both revenue projections and spending requirements. State aid did not increase and local receipts fell. Earlier labor contract obligations had to be incorporated into the budget along with the consideration of additional expenses due to the pandemic. In the end, a balanced budget was achieved, but not without making some difficult reductions in personnel services and using free cash for plugging what we hope will be one-time revenue losses. In January of 2020, departments were asked to send budget requests to the mayor and city auditor. Finance team began a review of the requests, removing capital requests that would generally be funded through free cash, as well as new programs or positions that the city was not yet ready to pursue or fill. The team also continued a review of revenue estimates that are the source of funding for the budget. In March, the COVID-19 pandemic began and had a great effect on the FY21 budget, particularly in terms of revenue projections. Finance team had to reduce revenue estimates for the hotel excise tax, fines and forfeitures, licenses and permits, and investment income. The amount of state aid was also uncertain because state revenues were also being reduced by the pandemic. During this time, I instituted a hiring freeze till the city had a better understanding of these revenue estimates. In April, I asked department heads to review their budgets and to reduce their overall budgets by 2 to 3%. Many departments were able to make reductions. However, the city budget was still at a deficit. In May, the city requested to meet with its unions to discuss budget reductions and cost savings in hopes of negotiating terms to ultimately avoid reducing our workforce. Unfortunately, the requested negotiations did not come to fruition. So the finance team began taking steps for possible reductions of state aid at level funding, a 10% reduction and a 20% reduction. On July 30, Governor announced the state's commitment to level fund unrestricted local aid and Chapter 70 education aid. The local aid reduction was $253,734 less than the governor's figures, which were originally submitted in January. Since maintenance and capital expenses were reviewed and reduced by the departments, the finance team was left with no other option except to consider personnel. Our first step was to determine what positions would be open due to attrition, either from promotions, retirements, or resignations. This analysis was fruitful in that it produced meaningful results to help bring the finance team toward a balanced budget. Nevertheless, police department will not fill a clerical position and 2 officer positions. Fire department will not fill 2 firefighter positions after expected retirements in January. Public Works Department will operate with 2 less laborers in the Highway Division and 1 less laborer in the Parks Division. The library will not fill a teen librarian position, and community development will not fill a part-time program assistant position. The unfortunate reality of the current situation is that reduction in our workforce was necessary to close the final deficit. These positions included a principal clerk in the treasurer's department, the printer within the purchasing department, the program coordinator at the senior center, and the assistant in the recreation department. Making this decision was a step I had hoped to avoid, but the duration and seriousness of the COVID-19 pandemic has left the city with no other option. There is no question municipal governments are not immune from the burden and economic loss the private sector has experienced in the past 6 months. It is simply felt after the pain has been inflicted on the private industry. The impacts of this pandemic are reoccurring and will take years to recover from. Not long after the FY21 budget is passed by this council, we will begin discussions for the FY22 budget. As we move forward into budget discussions, let us be reminded of the essential services the city of Fitchburg continues to provide without interruption during these trying times. I'd like to applaud city staff and thank them for their efforts. Municipalities across the Commonwealth have been pushed to their limits these past 6 months, and this will continue well into 2021. We must maintain the course, focus on the continuation of services, and provide the best that we can for the residents of Fitchburg. Thank you. Now, the auditor's next part of the process, please.
Thank you, Mayor. What we're going to do tonight is just go through the budget, kind of page by page, department by department, to explain what is included and what we've been doing. So what I'm starting off with is the revenue and the revenue projections. So starting on page 4 on the budget. The first part of the, well, actually, revenue, there are 4 parts to our revenue coming into the city. The tax levy accounts for 42% of our revenue, state aid about 46%, local receipts about 10% this year, and available funds 2%. Compared to last year, the numbers are similar, except that there's been about a 1% shift of a reduction in local receipts and an increase in available funds. And I will get to that as I discuss the available funds. Starting at the top is taxation, which is the property tax levy. We're using the full 2.5% increase that's allowed by law. New growth of $750,000, which is a pretty good figure. And I guess at this point, I would thank the assessor's office for their work in going after new growth, which is new construction and other increases in the city's stock. From that total of $57,824,000, we subtract $950,000 for what's called the overlay or the reserve for abatements. This is recognizing that there's a certain amount of money we may not collect because of abatements or exemptions granted from the tax bills. That's offset on page 5, the bottom, by $700,000 of overlay surplus. So this is excess overlay or excess reserve for abatements that we have from previous years, and so the assessors can release to give to the city budget. The difference would be $250,000, and that's about what we grant each year in abatements and exemptions. The next sections have to do with state aid. As the mayor stated, state aid was level funded this year for the unrestricted general government aid, which is money we can use for any purpose within the city. Chapter 70 school aid was level funded plus an inflation factor. The governor's numbers in his budget back in January were slightly higher. So that was what we had started the budget process with. However, with the pandemic, we had to wait for confirmation, and it was on July 30th that they finally announced that they were level funding us. The uncertainty with state aid going forward will continue as long as we're in this pandemic. And I know that the state, as well as the city, is watching the relief negotiations in Congress, the next relief bill that they're going to pass. One of the questions being raised is how much relief will be granted to municipalities and states. I know some congressmen and senators feel like it doesn't matter, we can just file for bankruptcy, what's the big deal? But the big question is whether they're going to allow us to use relief funds for revenue replacement. Because for the city, the cost of this is not, and I think for the state, the cost so much is not in the expenses we have in providing protective gear and all that. The loss we're experiencing is with our revenue. And that's where we're looking for some relief. If you turn to page 5, these are the local receipts. So this is where we've really taken a hit or can take a hit with our revenue. Local receipts are funds that are generated locally. That's why they're local receipts. And they have to do with motor vehicle excise tax, licenses and permits, fines and forfeits, those kinds of things. Motor vehicle excise revenue is projected to be less for two reasons. One, we expect there'll be lower collections because of the pandemic and the economic impacts of that. And I expect we'll also have lower tax bills because people will not be buying new vehicles as frequently. And so their old vehicles will depreciate and there's less tax on those vehicles. The big loss we're suffering from is other excise rooms tax, which is the money we collect from the activity at Great Wolf Lodge. They closed in March and are not expected to reopen until we get into phase 4. And I believe phase 4 doesn't really start until we have a vaccine and we are pretty well through this pandemic. There is a quarter lag in collections on room excise tax. So they closed in March. So the period from April, May, and June is what we would get paid in September. So I expect in September, we will have 0 coming in. You can see that we lowered the estimate from last year's estimate of $1,050,000 down to $500,000. That's assuming that they'll be open for at least 5 months. If we're waiting till phase 4, it could be longer. So we'll have to wait and see on that one. And this is why we try and, with our revenue, try and budget conservatively, try to underestimate a little bit the revenue so we have some room in case something goes south. The pandemic is also affecting licenses and permits, fines and forfeits because we're not writing as many parking tickets, parking revenue because we're not collecting as much parking meter and parking garage fees. And that's because we don't have as many people working as we used to have in this area. They're working from home. Investment income will go down because the Fed now has lowered interest rates to close, or the prime rate to close to 0. And so interest rates will be low and that's affecting our interest income. One thing I do want to point out is charges for services trash. This is the amount we collect for landfill fees at the landfill. That figure here is budgeted to equal what we pay for solid waste expenses. We generally have been collecting closer to $3 million, and I'll show you that in a minute. The reason we don't budget closer to the 3 million is a reluctance to use trash fees to subsidize the budget. They're collected for a particular purpose, and we don't want to be reliant on money that isn't related to the expenses we're using it on. And in particular, these are landfill fees. The landfill, as I understand it, is scheduled to be closed in July of 2024. That'll be in 4 years, at which point that revenue will dry up and we'll be looking at having to fund $2 million or $2 million plus in expenses without getting that $3 million in revenue. So I just point that out as something that the council needs to be aware of and something that over the next few years we should be addressing so that in July of 24, if we in fact close the landfill, we're not suddenly in crisis trying to either cut $2 or $3 million out of the budget or come up with fees on a moment's notice. That's for local receipts. The other item I want to point out on this page is at the bottom, available funds. So available funds are what we're taking out of free cash. Because of the way the pandemic works, they're allowing us to use last year's free cash beyond June 30th for the purpose of reducing the tax levy. That's the way the order was written. That's the way the Department of Revenue asked me to have it written. Basically, this money is being used to help balance the budget. The 2,109,000 has four components. There's 675,000 that's being applied to our snow and ice reserve. Last year, we had a figure of 600,000 in that reserve. We were able to bump it up a little bit this year. And this is in reserve in the budget. Normally, we take it out of this year's free cash. So to use last year's free cash is at least better budgeting. And it would be in the reserve for subsequent appropriation by city council when we want to fund the snow and ice deficit. There's 234,000 for City Hall and the move from Boulder Drive to Main Street. That's a one-time expense. And it basically represents $100,000 for the move itself and about 134,000 in overlap. Because, and this will be explained later in the budget process. We've basically over budgeted a little on the facilities department because we don't know when some of these positions are starting, when we actually are going to move, when we're going to stop paying rent. So we have things budgeted pretty much to pay rent all year and to have City Hall operating all year. And somewhere in the middle we'll meet, there'll be some extra funds, which will just close to free cash next year. The big item, as I've alluded to, is lost revenue this year. So we're, from available funds, we're using 800,000 to cover lost revenue. This again is, I'm viewing as a one-time use. It's meant to replace a chunk of the hotel tax revenue we're losing from Great Wolf, as well as parts of licenses and permits, fines and forfeits, and investment income. I say one time because the expectation is that Great Wolf will reopen and we will begin to collect the taxes. If Great Wolf were to announce that they were closing, then this would not be a good use of funds because we're basically using funds that are not going to be replaced or not going to come back at some future time. The last 400,000 represents host fees. This is money we've already received from the various host agreements we have with marijuana companies. I'm not allowed to use those host agreements and projected revenue in revenue estimates for next year. So we're taking what was collected last year and basically applying it to this year's budget. Those host agreements run about 5 years, so they'll be gone in a couple of years, at which point in time we should be pretty much up and running with the retail marijuana business, and we'll be collecting the sales tax on marijuana. And that will replace the host fee money coming into the budget. And I guess I would say what it means is we're basically already spending the projected marijuana sales tax revenue in our budgets. So when that money comes in, there isn't a windfall where we're going to be able to say, phew, we've already applied it to the budget. This page 5 shows revenue estimates used in the tax recap when we set the tax rate. I'd just like you to turn to page 52 near the end of the packet of the budget. And what this shows is what actual revenue was from FY16 to fiscal year 19, and then the recap of budget figures for 20 and 21. In particular here, I would just point out the charges for services trash, and you can see where the actual figures are over $3 million. We're only budgeting just over 2. And as I say, that's because we're trying to keep our budgeted figures within line with what we're actually spending on solid waste. On page 6 is a summary of expenses and revenue. By statute, the mayor has to present a balanced budget. Revenue has to cover expenses. That's what we've been struggling to do. This budget shows that there's a $3,516 surplus, which in my mind is essentially a balanced budget. If you look back on the previous years on this schedule, it's showing deficits, and what those deficits actually account for is the amount of available funds or free cash that were used to cover expenses beyond what was originally budgeted. The two right-hand columns, and you'll see these all through the report. One shows the changes between fiscal year 20 and 21. And then this right-hand column shows the difference between what the departments requested and what the mayor allowed. In some cases, we're doing this to show what capital projects or requests departments had that we didn't feel should be covered in the budget, that maybe should be capital items or covered out of free cash later on. Police vehicles, we often do that with fire vehicles. And then there are also some to indicate where we made some reductions in force or other means to balance the budget. That concludes my part with revenue. And I guess unless there are questions, I would turn this over to AJ Terigny.
Counselors, any questions before AJ Terigny takes over? Seeing none, Mr. Terigny, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Auditor. Counselors, I'll be covering pages 7 through 10 at this moment. Starting with page 7, the legislative section, total operating budget of $595,910. If we move down to legislative city council, you'll see education and travel, $1,000 increase. This was requested by the president and honored by the mayor to help assist with your educational needs and forums that you attend. The next line item down is ordinance code supplement for $6,180. As you guys may remember, we wrapped up phase 1 of our zoning code changes. That is the cost for our vendor to make the adjustments in the zoning book. Moving down to city clerk personal services, you'll see these COLA and step and contractual changes within the budget. At city clerk expense, a $700 increase for licensing. Moving to page 8. Elections, you'll see increases within the election personal services. As you all know, and thank you very much to the city clerk's office and the poll workers that worked the early voting in the state primary. That's covering those aspects as well as the presidential election in November. In election expense, you'll see reductions of $8,600 and $11,000. That was because that was during election cycle last year. That was local. We have a state and federal election where ballots are paid for by those governments. And then moving down to licensed commissioners, you'll see that there's no changes there. On page 9, the executive in the mayor's office, very vanilla. You'll see that there's increases based off of COLA and ordinance changes. And the remainder is the same in level funded. Page 10, human resources, the same holds true with COLA and step increases, and then just very minor adjustments in advertising and printing expenses with reductions. Page 11, I lied, I said 7 to 10, up to 11. My apologies. The legal department, we have COLA increases for personal services. In the legal labor and mediation, you'll see that there's a $34,000 reduction. That's simply our insurance claims that vary year to year, and we appropriate as necessary throughout the fiscal year. And then the same holds true with the labor negotiator. We fund it at $20,000, and depending on what contracts and what services that we need to assistance with, that fluctuates throughout the year, and thus the $30,000 reduction. Down to legal expense, if you could remember back in FY17, we've consolidated those expenses. There's an increase of $6,231. This helps cover the ongoing expenses with running administrative support in 2 different offices, licenses, software, agreements, and so on. Mr. President, that's my portion for right now. You get to see me again shortly for 7 through 10. Otherwise, I'd like to turn it over to the city treasurer for the next one.
Counselors, before we do that, any questions on items on pages 7 through 11? Seeing none, Ms. Cervantes.
Thank you. Starting on page 12 with the assessor's budget, the personal services changes are all per contract. The expenses have been reduced somewhat at the mayor's request to reduce budgets 2 to 3% earlier this year. The reduction in revaluation expense is because that only has to be done once every 5 years, and it was completed last year. Turning to page 13, the auditor's budget. Again, the personal services are per contract and ordinance. The expenses are reduced somewhat, again, at the mayor's request this past spring. The outside audit is increased by $2,000. That is per contract. That is our annual audit. The actuary services have increased this year because every other year we have to have a full OPEB valuation, and this year we have to have the full valuation. Page 14, purchasing. There are contractual changes under personal services. There are also a couple of other things I wanted to mention. The procurement officer, there's an increase of $8,578 from last year. That is because the position was vacant for almost 3 months last year, and the $50,000 that's requested for this coming year is a full year's salary for that position. The offset printer, this is one of the positions that was not funded this year, so that is a reduction of $40,600. Under expenses, let's see, printing supplies. This is the billing to various departments for the printing services, the in-house printing services. And since we are no longer doing that, there will be no receipts from departments. Training is, the request is up $1,500. That is because the new procurement officer needs to complete her basic purchasing training with the state. And also the chief procurement officer needs to take 1 class per year to maintain her certification. Page 15, IT. The under personal services, again, contractual changes. The help desk technician, they did request a full that go to full time. The mayor did not honor that in his budget, left it at a part-time position. Under services, software support, that increase of $30,800 is contractual increase. See the reduction on the equipment and web page of $30,000. That is a project that has been completed, so no more funding is needed. Capital equipment, the increase of $10,000. That is for needed capital equipment, large expenses, and also unknown expenses if any come up during the year. Recent uses for that have been a server replacement at the water and wastewater departments, as well as replacement of ambulance software. Under PEG access and cable related, the $25,000 in expenses is for negotiations for the license renewal with Comcast, and that is being offset with receipts of $25,000. Page 16, parking.
Ms. Cervantes, if we could, Councilor Zarella has a question, I believe, on page 16. Councilor Zarella, the floor is yours. You were muted, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. I had a question on page 14. I'm just looking at the offset printer line. I was wondering if you could briefly explain what the remaining $13,000 is if we're cutting the position.
That is because the position was filled for part of a year.
Okay. That's what I figured. Just wanted to double check.
Okay. Okay, so page 16, parking. Again, contractual changes, increases. The overtime request is just there in case we need it. Some years we use it, some years we don't. The sick leave buyback, we had an employee retire last year. That will not happen again this year, so there's no need for any funding in that line item. Expenses, small increases. I've estimated, what I think we will need in the coming year. Under equipment and repair, we've reduced that a little bit because we haven't spent, for the most part, we haven't spent quite as much as we've spent in past years. Parking, building, repair, and maintenance. This year was, last year was funded at $80,000. That's an unusually high amount. It was for the installation and purchase of security cameras at the 2 downtown garages, and that project is complete. So the request for this year is $25,000, which is actually a little less than we've requested in recent years. We usually request $30,000. Tax collection on page 17. Here again, under the personal services, we see one of the positions that wasn't funded. One of the clerk positions in the treasurer's office was not funded this year. Under expenses, pretty much the same as they have been, some a little higher, some a little less. Under tax title foreclosure, I'm requesting $80,000 this year instead of $100,000. The land court closed down for a few months between March and June or so. So all foreclosure activities really came to a halt. So I did not use all of the monies that were appropriated for last year. So I'm able to encumber those for this year. So I was able to reduce my request for this year. On page 18, debt service. Maturing debt, we've had a small reduction there. That's a combination of two things. In fiscal 20, we used $1 million to pay down the Longest Joe school roof. That is completed now, so there won't be any other payments on that. And then this year, at the end of last fiscal year, we borrowed the city borrowed the first $15 million for the City Hall project. So the first payment will be due at the end of this fiscal year, and between those two changes, we've had about a $345,000 decrease in maturing debt. Long-term debt interest, that increase is due to the fact that we are starting to pay on the $15 million that we're borrowing for City Hall. Short-term debt interest is down. That's just because we've done relatively less short-term borrowing than we did last year. And then reserve for capital spending, that is used for capital purchases subject to appropriation in the coming year. It also serves as a placeholder for future debt service for projects such as City Hall, the Crocker School, and the library that are coming up. That's the end of my section for now. I'll turn it back, goes back to AJ at this point, if there are no questions.
Any additional questions, councilors? Councilor Boschman, you're muted.
Got one question. On the assessors, are we saving money by farming out that work? Because I see it's going up.
Contract services?
It's the same.
Are you talking about the contract services, Counselor?
Yeah, the assessors. We replaced Ken Wilson. We farmed out that work to that outside group, assessors.
Council, that the price for the contract services line item is not increased.
It's not? All right.
Any further questions before we go back to AJ Tarigny?
Yes, I have a question.
Councilor Squalia.
Just following up on Councilor Boschman's question about the assessor. The total assessor cost has increased from FY19 actual 364,000 to FY20 projected 424,000, and then the FY21 to 397 thousand. Are we saving money with contract services as a whole, or are there other expenses that affect the reason why we have, increased our total assessor costs?
So it's two-part answer to that question. Number one is that yes, there's always going to be increase with personal services in the assessor's department with contracts and COLAs that are settled throughout the course of time. The second part of that is in FY20, there was also a $30,000 reval year, which changes depending on each as reevaluation time hits. The other part is that contracted services with any vendor usually has, similar to COLAs and step increases, has increases built within the contract of one varying anywhere between 1% and 2%. So with the cost of inflation and with any department, you'll see increases accordingly.
I don't understand.
Okay.
I have Councilor Di Natale.
Thank you. Mr. Terigny, correct me if I'm wrong, the overall assessor's budget for FY21 is $27,287 less than FY20.
That's correct.
Thank you. Correct me if I'm wrong. Contract services for our private vendor, are they increasing? It says it isn't.
They're not increasing, correct, not for this fiscal year.
Thank you. Next question to Auditor Brooks. If you were paying a chief assessor $110,000, also including their 30 years of pension and health insurance liabilities, are we saving money by having a private contractor for $127,000?
Yeah, if you figure benefits are 25% of salary, it's an even swap in terms of dollars.
But your unfunded liabilities are far less, right?
Correct.
So if you were to pay someone 110 and then project 30 years of retirement of benefits that a private contractor does not get, I would assume that analysis would show above and beyond, without a doubt, we are saving hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Right, and the other piece that you get with the contracted services, when you can look at it as one person that you're getting, we're actually getting a couple of different people doing a couple of different things, and that helps. That helps.
I understand. I'm not suggesting that. What I'm suggesting is wherever we can, privatization should be looked at, since many people like to keep throwing out that we have an unfunded liability. So in this case, that's why we did it. It's one position that saves hundreds of thousands of dollars that we can farm out. And I just want to make that clear to the viewing public that we are saving money by doing this. Thank you.
I don't see any further questions, so we'll go back to our finance team.
Thank you, Mr. President. Councilors, I'll be doing pages 19 through 27, starting off with community development with a total operating budget of $467,009. In community development personal services, you'll see various increases. Those are COLAs and contractual agreements made. The program management assistant with the program management assistant part-time of $27,337 is not funded as part of our attrition plan. Moving down to community development expenses. For all these expenses, you'll see that they're essentially level funded or close thereto. Down at DEP compliance, this is dealing with the steam plant as well as the fire department lot at headquarters. This is to cover our obligations with DEP. Just so that you all are aware, and as a side note, community development's been actively looking at applying for grants through the EPA. They applied through the first round. We were not funded, but through conversations with the EPA and making some minor adjustments to our application, we have a very competitive application for their next round. And that's on top of the community development as well as the mayor's list to attack. The land purchase below that deals with the phase 2 of the rail trail program. That through a series of design stages, we're pushing that off until final numbers come through. And when they do come through, whether it's this fiscal year or the following, we'll address, as we normally do with capital items, through the means of available funds. Turning over to the next page. Police Department, with a total operating budget of $8,350,911 to page 21. Police Personal Services, you'll see increases and reductions increases are based off of COLA increases in contracts. Reductions are based off of retirements up to and including the principal clerk is part of the attrition plan for the city. And then also patrol officers. There's 2 patrol officers that are part of the attrition plan, as well as a 3rd police officer that was not funded in the FY20 fiscal year. Moving down to benefits and stipends, you'll see increases based off of contracts, reductions based off of attrition and retirements. On page 22, civilian dispatch, the increases are based off of contracts and COLAs. And civilian staff support is the same. Page 23, police expense. Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. President,
Counselor Boishman.
got a question. Can we, to the chief of staff, can we as a city afford not to replace these retirement policemen?
But correct. This is part of the attrition plan. This is how we came to a settled budget.
I understand what you're saying, but as a city as a whole, can we afford to do that for our residents?
So, Counselor,
Counselor, you have another suggestion perhaps? Where we can take some money?
Counselor, so this is an opportunity at the end of tonight's meeting, when you'll be given an opportunity for commentary. I would encourage you to speak to that at the end of this budget presentation.
Tonight?
You can tonight at the end of the presentation after questions from department heads, then you can speak to this.
Because he won't like my answer when I give it to him. All right.
Councilors, I believe we're on page 23 with.
Mr. Turigny, I have a couple further questions. Councilor Di Natale is first.
Please.
Would the reductions in the police force be happening if there were successful union negotiations?
If they were correct, that would not be the case.
So if the negotiations were successful because of it,
And Counselor, let me re-answer across the board. It would have to be throughout the entire city, not just one particular union.
okay, but I mean, if it's like a deck of cards, it's a house of cards. If one union doesn't go along with it, none of them do.
Correct.
So if the union negotiations citywide were successful, would those officers be laid off?
And this was not a layoff. This was.
I'm sorry, attrition.
Correct. That the intent would be no.
And it would be the firefighters.
And it would be along with every other 9.5 positions that were not funded through attrition. So the firefighters, police department, DPW, the senior center, and the library.
I don't know if I'm allowed to ask this, so please tell me if I'm not, but because it was mentioned in the beginning of the discussion, but it wasn't really described in detail, but just a high level. Did the city come at the unions with a position of a pay freeze for 1 year or a pay cut? What did we propose to them?
Yep, we approached to begin conversations with ways to settle the budget.
We asked them to forego their cost of living and their step increases.
For 1 year?
That's it as a result of the conversation. So we can't. There's not. The conversations we began in the sense to open up negotiations and did not happen. So we took steps accordingly.
They declined to sit down.
Okay, so they didn't even want to hear us.
No.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Di Natale, that answers your questions? Okay. Councillor Van Hazinga, you have the floor.
Thank you. I think when looking at the cut in staffing through attrition, it's important to consider where the cuts are coming. Could you just at a general level, let us know where these positions are that are anticipated to retire?
Absolutely. So that's in the budget narrative at the beginning of the book, and as the mayor mentioned, but I can run through that quickly if you'd like. So with attrition, there's a community development position that's part-time.
I meant specifically with the two police officers.
I'm missing the question though. What about the position?
Are these patrolmen? Are they captains? Are they
No,
detectives?
It's through retirement, so we would be not filling in a new patrolman's position.
Okay, so wherever they are in the rank of the police force, everyone else will be promoted up, but we just would not fill at the bottom. Is that
correct? That's correct,
okay.
Sir.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Squalia. Floor is yours.
Thank you. Continuing on the patrol officers. So just to clarify, in the beginning letter, it notes that the police department will not fill a clerical position and 2 vacant officer positions. But is it correct that it's not filling, we're not filling a clerical position, 2 vacant officer positions, and we are not funding 1 additional patrol officer?
So right, so through FY21 attrition, those 3 positions won't be filled, and then in addition to that would be the FY20 position patrol officer. So there's a total of 4 positions, 1 clerical and 2 patrol officers as a result of FY21 attrition, and then 1 police officer position from FY20.
From FY20,
What? How long is that? FY20. Yeah.
Was that cut or was that through attrition?
Through attrition.
In FY20. Okay, thank you. Can you tell me are any of those patrol officers school resource officers or are?
They're patrol officers.
Okay. All right, thank you.
I'll just ask, you have next to the patrol officers line, FY21 versus previously, so you have 62 full-time versus the 59. Is the intent to continue, I know this would be beyond this current fiscal year. My question is getting at, are we leaving those vacancies intact, reflected in the budgets, with the intent of hiring back if we return to a new budgetary normal?
When we return to a new budgetary normal, there'll be a series of positions that we'll have to address one at a time to fill. Correct.
Understood. All right. Thank you.
Councilors, page
questions.
23, police expense. Office and supplies, again, those are for the most part level funded. Travel and training, you'll see a reduction in Recruit Academy, a reduction of $12,000. That's because the academy has been closed during this period. It's approximately $3,000 per academy student to go. So the chief has requested to maintain at least 1 position in the event that the academy reopens. There's also a $5,000 reduction in training ammo and firearms, and that is reduced training because of COVID related abilities to train. Vehicle and equipment, you'll see a $3,000 increase in supplies as well as tires and tubes. This is with the increased cost of vehicle repair. Under motorcycle leasing, you'll see a reduction of $21,900. The lease for the police department's motorcycles was up. The chief was able to reduce what was a lease of 5 vehicles down to 2, and those 2 are coming from other means of grants to allow flexibility within his budget. Building maintenance, again, for the most part, all these line items are level funded going into FY21. Vehicle replacement, actually the chief did not request a vehicle at this time. However, he will be certainly be coming to the administration when free cash is certified to see about bulletproof vests as well as a vehicle. Moving on to page 24, if you could. Fire department, total operating budget of $8 million, 5,014. Fire personal services, fire chief is funded at $100,000. This fire chief line item is at $100,000. This will allow us to finish compensation negotiations with the new chief, and will be followed by a supplemental budget to be provided to the council. The remaining of the increases are contractual COLAs and steps. You'll see at firefighters at the bottom of fire personal services, a reduction of 92,726. This is a reduction of 2 firefighter positions through attrition. Fire benefits and stipends, you'll see reductions in increases based off of retirements and contract increases. FEMA training director, that's a reduction because of retirement. Fire prevention, fire code inspector, similar to last year, the chief had requested an additional code inspector part-time to help fire prevention and their team in their efforts. The mayor certainly recognizes the wonderful work that Lieutenant Jordan does for the fire department in the city, but at this time, we're unable to fill that position.
President,
Please.
Councilor Boishman.
I'd like to know why we're going to be high. We put in front of the council 2 added positions where we're not adding any departments, but yet we're adding 2 in the fire department. I don't understand it. It doesn't stand. I just don't understand this whole thing.
We're not adding 2 firefighters.
You're putting 2 on.
Those are correct. That's not an addition.
To maintain staffing levels to adhere to the grant stipulations that you agreed upon 3 years ago.
I understand that, Mr. Mayor. I
That's the
understand
answer.
that wholeheartedly. But when the wallet's empty and you don't have any money, you just can't live up to the grant. So that's all I know.
So council, do you want us to give back the $367,000 for the grant?
How do we know we're gonna have to give it back? Have you asked?
That's what the federal government stipulates.
They stipulate a lot of things, Mayor. You know that. You were.
You want us to whistle past the graveyard, cross our fingers? Maybe they won't catch us? Can I call you if that happens?
You got my number.
Thank you.
Mr. Terregni, just as a follow-up, is it, am I correct in understanding if we were to not adhere to our grant fundings, we would be precluded from applying for any future grants, including our SCBA's this current year?
Yes, that's correct.
Mr. President, may I ask you a question then?
Councilor Boishman, I have several other councilors in
Okay,
front of
all
you.
right.
I will add you to the list. Next, we have Councilor Di Natale.
As has been customary, if I'm not doing what I should be doing, please tell me. So my question to Mr. Terregni, to the finance team is very simple. You are reducing the fire department payroll by 2 firefighters effective January, correct?
Yeah, please.
Counselor, yes.
And those are retirements that we're not going to fill.
Correct. The fire department right now has 2 vacancies from June. And those are appointments that the mayor held off in June from sending to, or July from sending to council until we had clarity on the budget and clarity on what the requirements were for the grant that we're still using through the middle of October. That's the reason the 2 appointments are on the agenda for next Tuesday's meeting. There are an additional 2 positions in the fire department that will be opening up short. Well, one is already open due to the passing of a firefighter. There's a second opening expected at the end of the month when a second firefighter retires. We will have to fill those 2 positions as well in order to meet the requirements of the grant. January, there will be 2 more firefighters who are expected to retire. They will not be replaced. If we
So we're on par with the police. 2 firefighters, 2 police officers, right?
Correct. We're trying to spread these non-filled positions across a range of city departments.
I mean, you folks cannot explain it any clearer that this is purely because of a grant we all accepted 3 years ago. And in spite of that, we are still losing 2 firefighters before the fiscal year is over. So the
I'll
firefighters
let you
are,
conclude your comment. I just asked to hold the commentary until the end of this.
okay, so well, I'm getting to a question here. So if we're reducing the firefighter headcount by 2, oh God, sorry, I lost my train of thought. So when we reduce the firefighters by 2, does the police department have any grants that we're hiring people off of that stipulate a minimum staffing level?
Not at this time.
So there's the difference. So I wanted to just ask you folks, when we accepted the grant, wasn't that grant acceptance putting us at the minimum staffing level the NFPA requires us to be at?
Correct, I believe so. I believe so, yes.
I recall former Chief Roy saying that. That's why we accepted the grant, because it would bring us back to a level that we weren't at for over 10 years. If we were to let go, so even with those 2 reductions in January through attrition, even though we're no longer under the grant stipulation, we're going to go back to being under the NFPA standard. Meaning, my point being is they're taking a hit, correct?
They are taking a hit, yes.
So, okay, I'll reserve further commentary after that, but I just want people to understand that they're getting pain like everybody else. Thank you.
Councilor Squalia.
Thank you. Just 2 questions. You noted briefly about Lieutenant Jordan and the fire code inspector. What was that? Can you please explain again what that $20,000 line item that was requested for the fire code inspector that is not being funded? Was that an additional position or?
Okay.
So that would be correct. It would be essentially supplemental pay for a firefighter that's already employed within the city to assist Lieutenant Jordan on essentially overtime to do various fire inspections in buildings across the city.
Okay, thank you. And so my next question was on the retirement for our FEMA training director. Is the expected lowering in the budget there of 3,000, is that due to we're getting a new FEMA director and they have a lower salary, or is that due to retirement and we aren't filling that position?
That's a lower salary for the person who is coming in to take on the position. The current occupant of that position has more than 25 years of service with the city and therefore has a higher rate of pay than the person who would replace him who has less than 25 years.
Thank you. And what month do we anticipate that position to be filled for the new position?
That retirement is scheduled for the end of September.
End of September. Okay, thank you.
Back to the finance team.
All right, hold on. Sorry, Ken, I need to collect what page I was on again. Page 25, please. Office supplies, fire department. There's a $1,000 reduction. That was the chief's way of helping reduce the overall cost. However, we did up the $2,000 travel and meetings, as there's going to be certain trainings that the new chief will have to do. Scrolling down to fire vehicle and equipment. There's a $19,000 reduction in firefighter equipment. That's because in FY20 we received a PPE grant. Firefighter supplies, the $2,000 reduction is part of the chief's way to help reduce overall costs. There is a $2,000 increase in automobile because of the similar to the police department, the cost of maintenance is going up. Inspector vehicles, the chief did request an inspector vehicle, and as well as an additional vehicle at 50,000 and 45,000. And at this time, the mayor's not funding as part of the general budget, but certainly will be a discussion for free cash. Moving down to fire building maintenance, we have increases in electricity and household, and these are just general prices that are going up. And then building improvements, there's a $60,000 request, and the fire department is looking at working with our on-call contractor. Received a rough estimate, the cost of replacing 2 boilers. Again, that will be a capital item for discussion with free cash, and that would be at headquarters. Moving on to page 26, building department, total operating budget of $1,185,017. Building inspectional services, you'll see increases based off of contracts and COLAs and reductions thereof. You will see there was a request for an additional wire inspector. That request was not funded in this budget process. There's also a sick time buyback that's budgeted in the case of any retirement that the building department may have in the coming fiscal year. Moving down to inspectional services expenses, you'll see a $1,000 increase in marketing. This is a new line item. This is part of the insurance services office, who sets the insurance rates for the city of Fitchburg. They've informed the building commissioner if he's to market certain materials in regards to the building department and permitting, it would help keep insurance rates low for our citizens. And so he's requested that amount for marketing. Office supplies, a reduction of $3,000 based off of what they've been spending in previous fiscal years, and the same goes along with dues and subscriptions. Automobile, the commissioner had requested an additional vehicle for an inspector, and at this time, that's not going to be funded and can be addressed through free cash. Miscellaneous expenses, the commissioner had originally asked for $100,000. This funding is used for securing and boarding dilapidated buildings that are publicly owned, privately owned, excuse me. And his request for $100,000 was for immediate needs of demolition if possible. If that is the case, and if that building if something of that nature ever occurs, the mayor would address it through other means other than the budget. Page 27, moving on. Facilities, this is facilities coordinator as part of last year's budget, and it approved through the ordinance in March, and has been funded through the continuing appropriation spending plan. You also see it here. We are going out posting this position within the next week. And as we discussed, this crucial position assists with prioritizing building maintenance plans, creating standards, procedures, managing risk, and certainly to help reduce our insurance premiums over a course of time. Electricity, City Hall, maintenance, electricity, $61,700. That it's higher than normal because we're funding electricity for 3 buildings right now. That of course will be reduced down to 2. Heating fuel, you'll see that it's currently, again, not funded. Heating is traditionally paid through our lease, through our common area expenses that we have with the FRA. And we will address payment for gas and heat with new City Hall through that line item. And then in when we do the FY22 budget, you'll see a number for heating fuel accordingly. Repair and care and was reduction of $3,000 to help settle a 2% reduction from the mayor. And contracted services, $13,000, that was moved up to the top under Boulder Drive custodian because we withdrew having a contracted service for cleaning in Boulder Drive facility and hired a part-time person to do so. City Hall relocation of $100,000. This will be used for hiring a vendor to move city offices from Boulder Drive to Main Street. And we are in the process of doing so. We'll be soliciting vendors to answer bid documents over the course of the next few weeks, and we'll be planning accordingly. Tax possession, and that also remains the same.
Question from Counselor Boishman. The floor is yours.
Sir, may I ask the question?
You may.
Why are we hiring somebody for a city hall custodian? And why are we paying $13,000 right now for fiscal 21 when we had custodians already? Why can't they go over there and do the work on City Hall where we are at the present time and the new building and wait on hiring that new person?
Counselor, this is a part-time position for Boulder Drive. The part of our lease pays for personnel to maintain this building outside of our control, if you will. There's a lot of services that's being provided to us that a custodian would normally do in a general building full-time that we're not paying for while on Boulder Drive.
Now, and what about the new place, this new City Hall?
That's why you see a City Hall custodian pay for $44,000.
Yeah.
So that was a time position.
Why can't we take somebody that's not that busy from another department and put them in and do two?
Counselor, I believe if you ask any department in the city of Fitchburg right now, in any municipality, there's not people not doing much. Everyone is overworked and been doing their share during this time. And now, crucially, we're also reducing the amount of city employees.
But my question is, if we have some of these departments that are not open, how could they be so busy?
Counselor,
Counselor, could I also say that the custodian, in the way I look at it, the custodian is not just doing maintenance, housekeeping on the building itself. He's also there to monitor the building. So I conceive that a custodian would not be working a 8:30 to 4:30 schedule, but would probably be working a 2 to 9 or 2 to 10 schedule, where they would be in the building after hours doing the cleanup, but also in the building monitoring it for public meetings and whatever else is going on. So it's not just the maintenance and the housekeeping in the building, but it also has some oversight of the building, or security, if you will, of the building. We do have it in there at 44,000, which is an annual budgeted figure. We haven't hired anybody yet, so our actual cost this year will be less.
All right. All right.
Next, we have Counselor Van Hazinga.
Thank you. The lease for the current city offices in Boulder Drive, does that run through the entirety of the fiscal year?
correct.
Okay, so we're on the hook after the move begins, we're still going to maintain that space.
We will, no, that's not, let me rephrase that. So the budget carries us through the fiscal year.
Okay.
We will be ending our contract or our lease with the FRA upon completion of us moving out of the facility. And then there certainly will be leftover funding in that line item that we're going to be using to pay for heating fuel, and the remainder close to free cash.
Okay, so we're maintaining some flexibility there, but there is the potential to reuse some of that money.
Correct.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Squalia.
Thank you. Have we looked into contract services for the City Hall custodian on the, continued air of funding OPEB and benefits for an employee? Is there any possibility contract services for that position?
That's always possible in those scenarios. However, we've learned through several different times being at Boulder Drive that particular service isn't rendering the needs that necessary. So that's why we've hired the part-time position for the past, year and a half, 2 years, and we'll continue doing so when we move to City Hall.
Good, thank you.
Back to our finance team.
Thank you. And now I'd like to turn it over to City Auditor Calvin Brooks.
Okay, thank you, AJ. So it's my hair, you know. Does it look, do I look all right? So, turning to page 28, this is talking about the Public Works Department budget. On the first page deals with administration and engineering, which is kind of the oversight of the department. In personal services, you notice that there's a change from to a clerical position from a DPW wastewater coordinator. I think that was an experiment in organization that we tried and prefer to go back to where the clerical person is responsible just to one department, the Public Works Department. The civil engineer position had formerly been split among the general fund, water and wastewater. It is now 100% general fund. And we've split the assistant city engineer position to be 47% general fund funded, 33% water enterprise fund, and 20% wastewater enterprise fund. And that was really because the two engineers have different specialties. As you may know, this civil engineer, Nick Erickson, was just appointed to be the assistant city engineer. My understanding is his specialty is environmental engineering, which is why he was dealing with both the public works, water and wastewater. His predecessor as the assistant city engineer did more civil engineering and roads work. So the intention is to have a civil engineer hired who would do more of a focus on the roads, basically swapping responsibilities and therefore swapping the split among the various funds. The business manager is also a position that's split three ways. It's funded 35% general fund, 25% water, and 40% wastewater enterprise fund. In the expenses, things are pretty much the same except for stormwater. We don't have a big chunk appropriated this year for stormwater because in June, we appropriated, or you folks appropriated $400,000 from available funds to stormwater to leverage a municipal vulnerability preparedness grant totaling about 1.2 million. And so we don't expect to need an additional chunk of funds for stormwater for FY21. I will say that the stormwater costs are adding pressure to the public works budget for two reasons. One is a shift from wastewater to the public works budget as the sewer separation projects take place, so that you have now two separate means of discharge. One is wastewater and the other is stormwater. And so the city Public Works Department is picking up more costs related to the stormwater. And then the other part of it is the additional costs that EPA is requiring through the consent decree they have with us and the things that we're supposed to be doing. There was a meeting scheduled in early March between the city and the consultant who's doing work on stormwater fees. And that was scheduled for here in City Hall on the day that we closed because of the pandemic. So as I mentioned, there's an issue with solid waste fees or solid waste costs that we're going to have to address over the next few years. A second cost or fees or some means we're going to have to begin to address has to do with stormwater fees. And so I expect that that's something that could be coming up in the next year.
Question.
Yep.
Are we working on a plan? Can I talk, Mr. Chair?
Yes, Councilor Boishman, the floor is yours.
Are we working on a plan for the MS4 program? Is the mayor, do you have any kind of plan for the MS4 program yet, or how we're going to operate this? Is it going to be like the wastewater and the water department where it be a different entity?
Okay, I'll answer that, Counselor. I talked with Nick Erickson today, And he kind of refreshed my memory as to what was happening in March. At that meeting, we were sitting down with the consultants and they were going to offer some ideas about which way we should go for funding this program. It could be an enterprise fund, it could be a utility, it could be a reserve for appropriation, it could be just fees that go into the general fund budget. And so I think because of the pandemic, all of that just got pushed aside, and we're just now starting to go back and look at that and say, all right, where do we pick up and let's move forward.
And I understand about the $1.2 million thing we got after we appropriated $400,000.
Yep.
But aren't we taking an awful chance not to appropriate any kind of funds towards the fiscal 21 year, where the EPA is already on our backs because of the soil water and the deficit separation of soil and water? Why would we want to do that?
I
I
think,
understand we don't have funds,
Right.
money. I understand that. Money talks. I understand that. A DS walks. I know.
I think the past couple of years, we've funded MS4 or stormwater through free cash appropriations.
Do the same.
This year, we're doing the same, except we did it in June using last year's money for this year's expenses.
Right.
So because we did it in June with if you look at last year, we actually, I think, did either 700,000 or 800,000 total, because we did an appropriation in the fall for FY20. And then in June, we did one that essentially was for FY21.
All right.
Counselor Boishman, I just ask that you keep it appropriate. Your question is fine, but the statements, keep them appropriate moving forward, if you could.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
Any further questions?
Appropriate.
Move back to the finance team.
thank you. Turning to page 29, this page is the budget for the Highway Division. Personal Services, the budget reflects 2 fewer laborers in the Highway Division. It still maintains the $100,000 subsidy from block grant and Chapter 90 funds. You will also notice that there's a reduction in seasonal labor. You're going to see that reduction in the cemetery and parks divisions as well. We did not hire any summer or seasonal help this summer, and so we just reduced the budget to reflect that. And in expenses, you'll notice that there is some reduction in expenses to balance the budget. This was done in cooperation with the department. Page 30.
Mr. Chair,
Counselor Boishman.
are we planning, Mr. City Auditor, are we planning to, this city can't afford not to hire a proper amount of people to work in the highway department. We just can't do it. It's affecting everybody's lives. I know you want me to keep it short, right, Mr. Chair?
Well, Counselor, it's got to be a question. So if you
Well,
have a question, ask it. If not, your commentary can follow the budget presentation.
All right, I'll do it. I'll wait. Okay.
Finance team, take it away.
All right, page 30. Page 30, that's at the top is a list of highway capital requests. We did not fund any of those because those are generally either taken out of available funds or through some other source. It kind of gives you an idea, and you can see through the budget, it gives you an idea as to what the departments are looking for longer term spending. And you'll note that in some cases, we've even, some of these things have been funded. The first item on that list is the Arbor Way Repair. And we in fact appropriated $600,000 for that. And I was looking back through, that was what was discussed at the last in-person finance committee meeting we had on March 17th. And I think we had that meeting and shut everything down the next day or 2 days later. Snow and ice is at $550,000. This is a $50,000 increase from what it has been. In FY 18, 19, and 20, we appropriated $500,000, so we're going up to $550,000. This is a section that we should be regularly increasing to get it to a higher, what I'm going to say base amount. We should be closer to $900,000 to $1 million for snow and ice, which would put us at the bottom end of a range of what we actually would spend for snow and ice in a particular winter. We don't have to budget, in my opinion, you don't have to budget for the worst winter. You just need to, but we should be budgeting enough so that with a reasonably mild winter, we are covering our expenses without having to tap the well of free cash. Traffic signals and street lights sections, there's no significant change in the budget. Going to page 31, Cemetery Division. You'll notice that the department requested a clerical position, which the mayor did not fund. Again, we reduced the summer help because there was no help hired for the summer. The labor line is showing a slight increase. That's because labor was understaffed in fiscal 20. And we went back to a full complement of 4 laborers for fiscal year 21. In the expenses, capital projects again would be funded from available funds. And I would just point out that in April, we appropriated $175,000 for cemetery expansion from available funds. Page 32. There is 1 vacant laborer position that we have not funded. That was vacant at the beginning of the fiscal year, and that temporary labor was reduced to reflect no hires this summer. In the expenses, there's no major changes. And with that, that concludes the DPW budget. If there are no questions, I would turn it over to Treasurer Ann Cervantes.
Counselors and finance team. So we're about a little over halfway through the budget. Council will then be given an opportunity to do commentary. Would we like to take a 5-minute recess? Would we like to press on?
We're comfortable with pressing on.
Counselors all set pressing on? All right, very good.
Thank you, Mr. President.
So I guess if there's no questions for Mr. Brooks, this section, I'll begin on page 33 with the Board of Health. Contractual increases and changes for the personal services, with the exception of the sanitary code inspector, the 8th line down, an increase was requested for that. That is fully grant funded, so there's no effect on the general fund budget. A little further down, weights and measures inspector and scale master. For the past many years, the city has been contracting with the state for weights and measures services. The state will no longer be supplying those services to the city, and the city must hire somebody to do that work. It will be, Mr. Curry is hoping to combine it with the scale master at the landfill, and waste management would be reimbursing the city 25% of that salary for the scale master portion of the position. Next line down, litter patrol and recycling enforcement. This would be for seasonal litter pickup and recycling enforcement. Under expenses, oh, I'm sorry, we're not there yet. The remaining items under personal services are again contractual. Next page is expenses. The first 2 increases you see on that in that section are office supplies for weights and measures and weights and measures equipment. That would be required equipment and supplies for the new position. The mileage further down for 6,500 is per contract. The maintenance, the $5,000 increase for maintenance, not building or grounds, is for replacement of trash and recycling bins. The replacement costs are going up, and the bins are getting older, so some do need replacement. Under a contract weights and measures, that's the fee that the city was paying the state each year for the weights and measure services. That will no longer be paid to the state because we will have our own person doing it. Okay. Next page, page 35.
If we could, we have a question from Councilor Boishman. You have the floor.
One quick question. On the weights and measures of equipment, are we going to have to pay every year to make sure they're calibrated, to make sure they're actually right?
I don't know the answer to that question. This would be for the purchase. I don't know if it has to be calibrated every year.
15,000 is just a purchase.
Just the purchase, right? 15,000 is for the purchase.
Yeah, so there's no cost for if we have to have it calculated every year, don't we?
Counselor, the other, I would assume yes. We don't know the full answer to that, but the other assumption that you can make is the cost for ensuring the calculations are correct on the equipment. There are certain line items within his expense account that the Board of Health Director can be more than willing to take out.
Right. I would urge you, Counselor, to reserve that question for the Health Director.
Okay, I will do that, sir.
There you go. Good.
And is it also fair to assume any recalibration would not come to the cost during the FY21 budget cycle? That would most likely appear for us in the first time in FY 2022.
That would be a safe assumption, sir.
Thank you. I also have a question from Councilor Squalia. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Just to go back to page 33, to clarify, the weights and measures scale master, that's 75% from the general fund. And did you say that it was 25% paid by waste management?
Management for the scale master portion of the position.
Oh, waste management is paying 100% of the scale master. And we're adding an additional weights and measure inspector in lieu of paying the state. Can you just explain why?
The state has been providing these services to the city for many years, but they will no longer provide those services. So the city has to hire their own weights and measures inspector. Mr. Curry is hoping to combine that position with the position of scale master at the landfill. And if he does that, then waste management will reimburse the city 25% of the cost of that position, or $5,000.
Oh, okay. That's why it's a half full-time equivalent. Partly paid by waste management because it was taken over by the waste management. And can on the litter patrol recycling enforcement, is this a part-time position? Is this a stipend we are paying to an existing employee? Is this being paid by a grant? What is this position?
Mr. Curry described it as a seasonal litter pickup and recycling control position.
Okay, and it's just being funded 100% from the general fund?
So
actually, he said that 10,000 of it would be covered by the RDP grant.
correct.
RDP?
RDP. I don't know what that stands for.
That's out here.
Yeah.
Regional
Does anybody know?
DP? What is it?
The DEP RDP program at the bottom of the page.
DEP RDP program. Okay, so we get a $20,000 grant, and 10,000 of that will pay for our litter patrol. And what will the other 10,000 pay for?
Something in here.
Again, the specifics of those are going to have to come from the director himself, because there, as you can see, the Board of Health is very unique in the sense that they have almost 10 to 12 grants that fund several positions throughout the entire department. So those type of specifics will have to direct to the director.
Okay, great. Thank you. All set.
I think we're on page 35 now, if there are no more questions. Public health nurse. Again, the personal services are contractual increases and the nursing supplies is level funded. Page 36, rubbish collection and disposal. Those first two lines, contract fees collection and contract services disposal, are contractual increases. The third line, the closed landfill maintenance fund. This is the beginning of a fund for maintenance of the landfills in the city that are already closed. Mr. Curry is hoping to have some money set aside so that when we do get to the point where some maintenance is needed for these landfills, the funds will be available for that maintenance. Next is veteran services.
Mr. Chair,
Counselor Boishman.
one question for her or the mayor, I don't care. On this getting ready to close in 24-24, are we working on a plan right now to be ahead of the steps besides putting money away for the residents to have picked up their rubbish and all that? Is there any kind of plan being talked about?
Counselor, I'll answer that. At this point, there's no plan being talked about. It's something that we're going to have to address. We've got 4 years to do it, so we've got some time to figure things out, which I think we should use. At the same time, I don't think we should just let it fly away. I think we need to begin to have those conversations, begin to understand what we're doing.
Okay.
Counselor, I think because this is extending far beyond this budget, but your question is a good one because it'll certainly impact future years. I think as we get a little bit closer, perhaps 9 months from now, whether it's during next year's budget cycle or just about 12 months from now, I think it would probably be appropriate to have a presentation about potential options for how we mitigate this loss. So, Counselor, I think we can address it, and it would be appropriate for us to get a forecast of different options that the auditor might employ to make up for that revenue.
I spoke with Waste Management this morning, and they're slowly moving volume out of the current facility to extend it to 2024. And they continue to work with the legislature and the governor's office because landfills are closing all over the Commonwealth. The cost of the city would be to have to transport all of our waste out to other states, be extraordinary. So what we're hoping on, and there's a great deal of cobbling together that's going on between Waste Management and some of the individuals nearby, and also the Department of Recreation, to make sure that we can swap land. That's always a tricky process, and it has to go through the legislature. So it's long and drawn out. They're well underway with pursuing that, and we're just we're waiting to get some of those areas within the contiguous area of the landfill to agree to it, and that's what we're hoping for, because that will extend the life of the landfill certainly at least 10 or 15 years. But right now, 2024 looks like that's the ground zero, so to speak.
Counselor Di Natale, floor is yours.
Panel, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't we have a detailed presentation from the Health Department and Waste Management several months ago in Finance Committee that discussed exactly what you're being asked?
Correct. That's right.
And the wheels were already in motion on this.
Yeah.
I believe the plan they submitted there was a plan that they submitted to us, and right now it rested with the state in terms of that negotiation between the land slot. But that there is a plan they're going after, correct?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, the city has been planning ahead, and as evidenced by the fact that this budget has this money in there, that's even beyond what we've been planning. It's an added step. So I just wanted to clarify that this was discussed many, many months ago in finance with the health department and waste management who were before us to present to us a plan that they were attacking with the state legislature. So, thank you.
I mean, council, it's COVID. COVID's put the brakes on a lot of issues that we were.
What's COVID?
Yeah, what's COVID? Yeah. Well, I mean, that's true. That's what's going on.
So I believe the last time we discussed this, and I really, because we're forecasting years beyond, I don't want to devolve into a whole discussion about this. But I seem to remember when the presentation we had, it was much more optimistic about the extension of life beyond 2024. And Mr. Mayor, I think you could probably elaborate a little bit more, but am I correct in understanding that the legislature has it's a little less optimistic of a forecast coming out of the legislature of extending this?
It's not so much the legislature, some of the surrounding communities that are exerting some pushback, you might say. But the Baker-Polito administration is on board with it. So is DCR. It's just ensuring that we try to keep everyone as happy as possible. But they're doing all they can to extend the life of the existing landfill right now. So they're trucking some of it out in order to go vertically even higher, but they're limited as to how far they can do that as well. So there's a lot more work to be done.
So I guess to Councilor Boschman, your request of, I'll say this, as conditions become a little bit more certain and we have more clarity as to extension versus not extension, I am assured that the mayor and his administration are on it. And as we have a little bit more clarity, we'll certainly invite them back to give an updated presentation to conditions as they change.
Okay, I'm completely satisfied. Thank you.
Thank you. Back to the finance team.
Thank you. Page 37, Veteran Services. Again, personal services are contractual increases. Very little changes to the veterans' expenses. If you go down to the health fund cash, this is where the veterans' benefits are paid from, and $675,000 is projected for fiscal 21. Health fund funerals, this is a fund for a veteran. If a veteran dies indigent, then the funeral can be paid out of this fund here. I do want to note that 75% of the benefits that are paid out to veterans are reimbursed to the city by the state. Council on Aging, again, contractual increases under personal services. The exception would be the program coordinator, the $38,588 reduction. That is, again, one of the positions that was not funded for fiscal 21. Expenses are about the same as they were last year, small differences. Heat and electricity reduced slightly. That was part of the effort to reduce budgets by 2 to 3% last spring, as well as recognition that the building is not being used at this time. Recreation on page 39. Again, under personal services, we have another position that was not funded this year, the recreation assistant, the reduction of $23,274. Expenses are all level funded here. Under the pool and splash park, the pool expenses, the pool was closed during July and August this year. It will be hopefully open next June. So there's some left in that budget for the expenses for running the pool in June next year. Also, the pool repairs and maintenance and supplies, those accounts have been left funded because the pools do require maintenance even when they're not in use. And the recreation director is also concerned that opening the pool next June may actually be more expensive than in past years because it's sat unused for an additional year.
Can't make this up.
Page 40, library. Under personal services, let's see. Okay, professional services, the teen librarian position will not be filled this year. That accounts for the reduction in that line item. The next two line items, pre-professional and library assistants, together, the request for those two line items was $337,000. In the mayor's budget, $286,000 is being funded. The librarian will fit within that budget with her staffing and the hours worked. Library office, some small reductions in telephone and supplies. I'm sorry, in supplies and printing. Library supplies, there's an increase in the request for books and materials for both adult and child. This is to help cover the minimum required for the library to keep its state certification and to receive state aid to libraries. They have a minimum amount that they have to spend every year for those things. Library maintenance, some small reductions there. Again, part of the effort last spring to reduce budgets by 2 to 3% and reflecting the fact that the building's not open as much as it is, or it's not open at all now, but staffing, I don't believe, is there all the time, or so they don't have to heat the entire and use as much electricity.
Councilor Boishman with a question.
I got a question, probably to the chief of staff or to mayor. With this COVID-19 and the library not being open right now, and there's a good possibility that it probably won't open up to next year, late next year. Why are we fully funding these positions if it's not going to be open and we don't know when it's going to open?
Councilor, the library, it may have not, the doors physical doors may not be open to the public, but they're offering services to the public very much so, including curbside pickup and whatnot. They're also doing maintenance plans. They're providing services in the sense of even making masks and whatnot. And also a lot of the work is funded through part-time help that's hourly. So they are providing services to the public. Actually, if I encourage you to go onto the city website and go onto the library section of the website to see what services they're offering, if you haven't already.
All right,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
If there are no other questions, I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Brooks.
Okay, thank you, Ann. At this point, I'm looking at page 41. Employee benefits, non-contributory pension. The last non-contributory pensioner we had passed away last year, so we have no future costs in that line. Contributory pension, the assessment will increase in future years at a 6% annual rate. This year, the increase was slightly less than 6% because we paid off the early retirement incentive that was from the 2003 early retirement incentive program offered by the retirement system. That had been an annual cost to the city for the last 15 years of about $285,000.
I have a question from Councilor DiNatale. The floor is yours.
So that's 600 plus thousand. That's like a gift, correct? Because typically it's been over $1 million.
Correct. The last couple of years, the increases have been at 8.7% annually. The increases were front end loaded so that the first few years of the schedule were higher increases, 8.7%. We're now dropping down to a 6% increase, with the exception that this year we paid off the early retirement incentive.
So is it fair to assume that from now through, what is it, 2033? From now through 2033, we will have guaranteed increases in that account alone of at least $650,000.
At least, yes, sir.
Guaranteed. Yep. So is it fair to tell residents that are listening that when their tax bill increases, a good portion of that increase, not the whole bill, but the increase is going to fund the pension debt?
Well, you could say that part of it does, yes.
I would argue it's over 50%. So Anyway, thank you.
I'll turn this back to the finance team. I'm going to ask that the Vice President Walsh take over chairing for just the next 2 minutes, if I could. Back to you, finance.
Thank you. Next item, pointing out is unemployment, which has an increase of $50,000, and that's in expectation of pandemic layoffs. These costs cover both non-school and school employees. So while we don't seem to be having too many of the non-school employees affected by it, school employees may be. Health insurance, we have a rate increase of 3%. The budget increases is only 2%, and that's because there's an expectation that fewer employees will mean lower costs. Again, these costs include the school department, and there's an expectation that the school may not be hiring quite as many full-time people as they have had in the past. General insurance, the increase reflects a rate increase for property and liability coverage. We were fortunate this year that we had an increase, but not as much of an increase as we've had the past few years. We've had reasonably good experience with losses, or may I say lack of losses. So we're hopeful that we can continue to go forward with good experiences, and probably not for FY22, but definitely for FY23, we should be able to get back into the insurance market and begin to get better rates for our insurance. Moving down to the reserve for snow and ice. This is similar to last year when we reserved $600,000. And this is usually covered by, the snow and ice deficit that we run usually is covered by available funds. Because we're setting up the reserve, we're actually using last year's available funds rather than the next year's. At the bottom is the appropriation for the Fitchburg Public Schools.
Just a moment. I think I have a question from Councilor Di Natale.
Mr.
You have the
Roth,
floor.
for the reserve commentary, is it the city's expectation this fiscal year, 2021, that we will be putting into stabilization again in OPEB, regardless of what our free cash is? I mean, are we committed to that? I'm asking because the transfer out has zero, of course, because all that's free cash related.
Right.
So I know you passed over that because there's nothing to talk about at this time, but is the city committed to still putting money into those two funds?
My commitments are on hold as a result of COVID. All right, if we can, certainly those are very, very important line items. And we're gonna do all we can to keep funding them. But
All right, let me ask, when you do know what your free cash is and you have an idea, are those the first two accounts that are going to be taken care of first?
Historically, that's what we've done.
right,
Right.
So,
That's why I'm asking again.
right, historically, that's the first we've done. So once we know what free cash is, number one, and number two, where we stand with the pandemic, the mayor can make that decision. And I say where we stand with the pandemic, we're assuming that, there's a second wave, there's a vaccine. Are we done with this in 6 months, or are we going to be doing this for the next couple of years? What's that so-called new normal going to be?
Yep, okay. Thanks.
Okay, and with that, we'll return to the finance team, and I'll turn the meeting back over to President Kushmerek, page 41 at the schools, I believe you were at.
Yes, thank you. So the school appropriation of $63,265,000, it meets net school spending requirements. School transportation costs are in flux since it depends on what the schedule is for in-school learning. Last year, we had a savings on school transportation because there was no school, and so no buses running from March to June. We do have overhead costs associated with maintaining bus capacity. So that period, for example, March to June did not cost us $0. We did have some costs, but because we're not running buses, we get a savings. Looking ahead to this school year, could be similar. Right off at the start, the first 10 days of school, their students are not in session. because they're doing training for the teachers. So there are no buses running. So we only have 170 days of bus transportation instead of 180. If they do a schedule where they have one group coming in Monday, Tuesday, and a second group Thursday, Friday with no transportation on Wednesday, they could conceivably save transportation one day a week, except that they also have to pay additional for cleaning the buses and so on. So all of this is still being negotiated and discussed and is subject to change based on how the pandemic goes. But we're trying to budget at least a reasonable number for school transportation and then see if there are some savings later on.
We have questions from Councilor Boishman first. The floor is yours.
One question to the Calvin Brooks.
Yes, sir.
Since you're on the financial team and the team had a fairly good idea of what was happening this year towards this budget, why in the world would we go out, and I know everybody's going to get mad, and give $50,000 away to Johnny Appleseed when we knew we were stuck? Why would you do that?
Why would we do that? That's economic development. So we should stop everything, Counselor. We should stop every effort we can make to encourage the Chamber of Commerce and the work that they do, not just for the city of Fitchburg, but regional. That's an important asset for our city. It's an important asset for the community. And I believe 50,000 is short money with what we retrieve in that. So I would always move in that direction. That's why we did it.
And Council, I would like to remind you that that's already been approved through your continuing appropriation plan as well, through the mayor's, I should rephrase.
I understand that, sir, and I understand it wholeheartedly. But I was just asking the question, were we already having layoffs? Why would we do it when the team knew we were having a hard time? Okay, that's it.
I think I explained it.
I have Councilor Di Natale next.
Folks, correct me if I'm wrong. Did the city council authorize that 50,000 in spending?
Yes.
Thank you. Next question I have about the schools. This is net school spending. And one of the questions, lady and gentlemen, that I get is, with the pandemic before us, there is a lot of questions I get from taxpayers about why we're spending the same amount on our school district when there is less of a need for in-person learning, or I shouldn't say need, less of in-person learning going on. And what I kind of try to explain to them, and correct me if I'm wrong here, that school spending is set by state law, right?
Correct.
And the state law, based on that, short of any legislative action by the state legislature and the governor, we have to abide by the net school spending number, correct? As if there was no pandemic.
Correct.
So what I wanted to impress upon people, since it is almost 50% of the budget, because I get people all the time asking me, why aren't we cutting the schools? When it comes to the schools, we don't have a choice in what we pay for. The state sets the minimum standard. And if we don't meet that minimum standard, we get penalized, correct?
Correct.
So if people don't like the fact that the school department is getting what they would get, pandemic or not, I just wanted to clarify here that it is dictated by the state what we give them, and only the state can say we're going to lower the requirement or increase the requirement. So I just wanted to make that clarifying point, because it's the biggest number on the page that I always tell people we can't touch it. What they say we have to spend is what we spend, period. So in anticipation of questions after tonight's meeting from constituents about that, I just wanted to get your concurrence on my thought process that it is state mandated spending, and short of state action, we got to keep doing it as if there was no pandemic.
Correct. We have to spend, the minimum we're required to spend is the net school spending figure. And we have to put that in. If we short, let's say $100,000 on net school spending, the state will reduce our Chapter 70 allocation by $100,000.
Right.
So there's no net gain for us in doing any of that.
And the state does not count transportation in that net school spending number, right?
Correct.
So that's even more of a challenge, pandemic or not. So I just wanted to get that clarified.
Right, and I'm going to suggest that if residents have questions about how the school appropriation is being spent, that really should be directed to the school committee and the members of the school committee and the school administration, because they're the ones that set the details of how that money is spent.
Right,
City
right.
council only spends, city council only appropriates a bottom line number, and it's the school committee that determines how that money is spent.
What is the, I know it's in the front page, but what is the Chapter 70 allotment that we're expecting to get from the state?
Hold on.
I can look. I'm not at that place.
Chapter
57.
70 is 57,709,000.
So that 57.7, that means the city is kicking in about seven.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, 8.
6.5.
No. 57. About 8 million plus.
Okay,
I mean, the 60. Oh, I'm adding Monty Tech. I'm sorry. So for the Fitchburg Public Schools,
6.5.
it's 63,265. So we're kicking in about 6.5.
yes,
Okay, so it's 57.7 of state funding, 6.5 of city funding.
correct.
Um,
And of that 6.5, a lot of that is transportation, which is not
Covered by.
not covered by
school spending.
by the Chapter 70.
right, so net school spending is less than 63, or is less than 63.2. You got to add transportation on top of the net school spending number to get the 63,265.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Next, we have Counselor Zarella. The floor is yours.
On the subject of economic development, would it be accurate to say that in order to not only maintain city operations through the duration of this pandemic slowdown, but to then reestablish ourselves on the other side of it, we need to maintain investment in future outcomes, not merely put our money towards current expenses?
Correct. Certainly.
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, that's all.
Thank you.
Back to the finance team.
Okay, so this page then concludes the general fund budget. Page 42 is just a summary of the two enterprise funds and the airport fund. So I'll go to page 43, which starts with the water enterprise fund. The first thing I'd point out is that this budget includes $112,377 coming from retained earnings to balance the budget. Water rates have not increased since June 1st, 2018. Talking with the department, I expect that they will be beginning a rate study shortly. So this is the third revenue analysis that we're going to have to be doing over the next couple of years. One being the solid waste costs, the second being stormwater or MS4, and the third now being water rates. And I think it's important that we keep moving on all of them. I would hate for the city to be in a position where the landfill closes, the water enterprise fund is running a deficit, and we're under the gun with stormwater because we don't have revenue coming in to deal with that and having to do it all at once. I think it's better to be working along and getting them done in a certain order. If you look at the water budget on personal services on page 44 and expenses on page 45, they're pretty much in line with what they've been in previous years. There's not a whole lot of variation on it.
I have a question from Counselor Di Natale. Counselor Boishman, I just asked, please use the chat box wherever possible, but you will have the floor after Counselor Di Natale.
Just very quickly, how much is remaining in that retained earnings account for the water department? If this happens, this 300,000+, what's left in there?
Offhand, I'm not sure. I think it's a few $100,000.
After this one?
Correct. So it's not critical, but it's approaching that from my standpoint.
So would you suggest that well, I guess I could ask Deputy Commissioner DeLine offline. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Counselor Boishman.
Question, did I hear you say right that they're gonna be, down the road, they're gonna be looking at a rate study? A
For the
rate-
water, for water, yes.
Now, aren't we defeating our purpose? We've been asking people to conserve, they conserve. And when they conserve, they don't sell a lot of water. When they don't sell a lot of water, they don't make any money. When they don't make any money, our rates go up. We're
Right.
afraid of a losing battle here. And
Yes,
my tomatoes are cost me not $200, $300. Really. I mean, I don't understand this. I think you would want it cheaper so people will water their grass and water their gardens or what they grow.
I hear what you're saying, but I think the restrictions on the water usage has less to do with cost and more to do with restrictions placed on the city by, and I can't tell you whether it's EPA or DEP, when the DEP,
Yeah.
when the level of the Nashua River goes down too much, there's a water ban that goes on.
Okay, I understand that.
And so we don't have control over that.
And you're watering your tomatoes too much. I've gotten calls on that.
They're really good.
Yeah, I haven't seen any of them. Let's go.
All right, finance team, back to you.
Okay. So I guess now I'm on page 46. For debt service. This year we've added loans for water mains last year and water meters this year. Wastewater is paying half the loan debt service for the water meters. In FY21, we make the final payments on loans that originated in fiscal year 99 and 2000. So the department will have additional capacity to borrow for major projects going forward. But we are kind of in a squeeze right now. They had a couple of capital requests. The $120,000 of departmental equipment is for the replacement of various trucks and vehicles that are either no longer safe or beyond their useful life. $250,000 is for a new SCADA system. SCADA, Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition. It's a type of control system architecture for supervisory management. I had to look that up. The current one and this is basically what manages the water filtration plants, the flow of water through the system and all of that. It's all computerized and gauges and all of this stuff. The current system we have is obsolete, parts and whatnot are unavailable, and it's critical that we get this system replaced before we have a major problem. And that's all I have for water. Turning to page 47, the wastewater enterprise fund. This budget includes $1,163,185 coming from retained earnings. As you know, the wastewater enterprise fund has a sizable balance, and I want to say it's $8 or $9 million that we've built up over the past few years to accommodate the debt service we're acquiring right now in order to meet the terms of the consent decree and capital projects. We'll begin to draw down this retained earnings balance, and in doing so, it helps us to smooth out rate increases going forward. I believe we're in the middle of a series of rate increases for the wastewater fund. Page 48 has personal services and expenses, and they're pretty much in line with what we've done in previous years. Page 49 on debt service. The increase is due to loan payments for work at the east plant and the wastewater share of water meters. And again, the impact on the enterprise fund and sewer rates is not severe with these increases in debt service because we've dealt with it in the rate studies we have.
I have a question from Councilor Zarella. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. Page 48, sludge disposal. What's driving that $186,000 increase there?
Okay, that one, that's to remove the sludge from the landfill, transportation to wherever it gets disposed. I think we went out to bid once, twice, 3 times maybe, and we just could not get a price that was in line with what we previously paid. And so we had no choice but to up the budget line item at this time. I think we are looking at other alternatives, but given time constraints, we had to accept the bid, even though it was substantially higher.
So not that I'm saying it's anyone's fault, I just want to make sure I'm clear. The fact that the cost is doubling is entirely due to an increased bid, basically?
Yeah, it's the market conditions that cause the price, correct?
Okay.
Is the anaerobic kind of address that?
Correct. So, and then, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And to the point of the mayor, we we've had several presentations on this, and the wastewater commissioner deputy commissioner is working on this, as well as community development and planning in the mayor's office, and procurement, the anaerobic digestion facility.
Why that takes on added importance is
right.
And we would become, again, there's many details to work out, but we would become a repository for surrounding communities. It's a significant need that's not being met. Has to be trucked many miles, very costly. So we're looking at, and we've already started the process of doing feasibility studies on moving in that direction.
Correct.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do recall that now that you mention it, and that sounds like a good plan moving forward.
Finance team, back to you.
Okay. Turning to page 50, the airport fund. I guess I'm pleased to report that the major projects are done. The administration building is done. The runway is done. The self-service fuel farm is done. So this budget projects what I would say is a return to normal, such as we get normal within this pandemic.
Before you move on, I have a question from Councilor Boschman. Councilor, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I have to go back to page 48 on that. Page 48, when Anthony was talking, the Councilor Zarella was talking about the sludge. I got a question for the mayor. Are we going to try to keep that in-house that what you just talked about, West Fitchburg? Or are we going to try to farm it out?
No, that's exactly what I was speaking about. We're looking at feasibility studies. We're looking at putting out RFPs for organizations, for companies that do this kind of work, and transforming the West plant into a anaerobic digestion facility. But again, I don't want to jump ahead of myself here. Let's take our foot off the gas. We still have details to work out. We want to make sure it's a benefit to the city in all aspects.
I agree.
That's why we're moving cautiously, but we're moving in a deliberate manner, and hopefully we're going to be able to go in that direction. I think it's important for the city.
Okay.
And
thank you. And I will have a question about the airport after.
I'm sure you will.
I assumed as much. I thought it was. I thought you were being proactive in sending that message.
And just to follow up on that, on page 48, if you look a couple up from the bottom under architectural and engineering, there's a West AD RFQ. And I've been around long enough working with the wastewater deputy commissioner to be able to understand that as West Plant anaerobic digestion request for qualifications.
Professor.
And there's an appropriation for $200,000. So to answer you, that's
the second
putting
page.
money in to move the process forward, to do some of the work that we want to do. And this, it's going to take some time to do. Okay,
So, Counselor Boishman, I know you have questions about the airport. Would you like to let the auditor move through the airport, or do you already have your questions lined
No,
up?
I'll let him finish what he's going to talk about the airport, then I'll ask him.
Understood.
okay. So on page 51, personal services, there's no change in staffing currently. I know the interim airport manager had wanted to add a little bit of staffing, and at this point we said no. Let's see what how things proceed. And there is a bump in pay for the interim airport manager compared to prior years, and that pay is in line with the ordinance that was approved by City Council last year, I guess. In expenses, the big increase is in aviation fuel and oil. That line has gone up because there's an expectation that we're having a greater volume of fuel sales. So the increase in the expense is offset by revenue on the first page from the fuel sales. People have commented to me that they are noticing more flights going in and out of the airport. I also understand there's a new tenant at the airport, excuse me, who's expected to bring in more flights and more activity at the airport. So I guess I would end by saying that with the airport, time will tell. We'll see over the course of this year how they do, and then we can begin to make a better decisions going forward as to how we want to proceed.
With that, I know that Counselor Boishman has some questions, so I will give him the floor.
Yeah, are you telling us, Mr. Auditor, that the airport's going to start paying us back their $50,000 a year starting this year?
I'm not saying anything on that, Counselor. What I'm going to say is that this year we can begin to at least have the airport not running a deficit. Hopefully they'll be able to make enough or generate enough revenue to begin to put money, to have a surplus within their accounts so that they will be operating, I'm going to say in a solvent manner instead of requiring the city to bail them out each year for the prior year's deficit.
Okay, and now, one other question. Underneath the new commissioner, Pete, he's a nice guy. I have to give him that much credit. Is he going to try to promote Fitchburg and try to get businesses in here with his comrades down here at the airport?
Counselor, he already has. The reason why we have a tenant at that facility is months of work of Mr. Kettle working with that potential tenant at the time to take that hangar. On top of that, tenant put serious dollars into that hangar and investment in capital upgrades. It's also bringing revenue in.
And because of the extension of the runway, this individual was at Hanscom Field. Okay, now he's taken.
Massport.
Was it Massport?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Somebody else was Hanscom, weren't they?
Possibly.
It might even be someone else, but larger facilities, much larger. They're very attracted to Fitchburg now because of that extended runway. And the fact that we have a self-serve fuel farm that provides jet fuel. So, and that's more expensive.
And I also like to add that Mr. Kettle is also actively working on the land, the additional land that's available at the airport for different uses now that the runway's closed, on the second runway's closed. So Mr. Kettle's been going above and beyond the call of duty to ensure that the airport maintains itself at its current level, but also exceeds its revenues for further stability in the future.
I understand that because I talked to Mr. Kettle numerous times.
Excellent. So you didn't have to ask the question.
See, you're growing to love the airport, aren't you, Councilor Boishman? Come on, tell us. Come on, admit it. Okay, good.
Counselor Boishman, any further questions?
Not on the airport, not at this time.
All right, Counselor Natale, the floor is yours.
Just very quickly, it's usually said that the airport provides no benefit to the city taxpayers. Can you please refute that? I recall, property taxes are paid on those hangars, right? I know Mr. Kettle's on, he can't speak, but I seem to recall that there are property taxes assessed at that airport.
Some of the buildings are owned by co-ops
Yeah.
or some kind of private enterprises. So I believe those buildings are taxed in some fashion, have some kind of property tax on them.
Right, so there's some property tax revenue coming out of that airport that goes to the general fund
Correct.
on top of any economic positive impacts we get. I know offline, I'll ask Mr. Kettle that question directly to ask him, how much do we get? But I just wanted to make it clear that there is a component of the airport that funds the general fund.
Right.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yep.
I know that. I just wanted, because
Understand.
it's a common misconception that they don't provide any revenue to the city's general fund, and that's not true.
Correct.
Thank you.
I will defer back to the finance team.
Okay, thank you. At this point, to take us home, I'm going to turn it back over to AJ Tarigny.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks. Counselors, on page 53, we're just going to quickly go over staffing levels. As we've been going through this presentation, you've been made aware of all of them. I'm going to jump right down to, if you will, the treasurer's office. That's the first department where you'll see a difference. That was a reduction of 1 personnel with the principal clerk. Purchasing was a reduction of the 1 personnel in the print shop. The police, that's the 3 officers that we spoke about earlier, along with the clerk position. Fire department is the 2 firefighters positions. The public works department is the 2 laborers and 1 parks. Community development is the part-time position. The health department is the addition of the weights and measure part-time. The building department, that is just a carryover from FY20. FY20 is supposed to be at 8 as well. If you recall, in FY20, we reduced the ZBA clerical support that was part-time. And that is just a correction. The facilities maintenance is the 2 individuals we spoke about earlier. Veterans is the same. Council on Aging is the program coordinator position. And then we also made a correction. A contracted employee through MOC was being counted as a city employee. So the auditor and the mayor made that correction. Recreation, again, that's a reduction of the clerk position. Library is the reduction of the librarian position. Airport remains the same. Water and wastewater, those figures change, as you all know, throughout from fiscal year to fiscal year, depending on certain positions and how they're funded within the DPW as a whole.
Excellent. Anything further to add from the finance team?
No, sir. I think we're all set. Thank you.
So at this point, counselors, as previously discussed, every counselor, should they so choose, will have no more than 1 opportunity to speak, provide any commentary, initial thoughts, or reflections on the information they've heard, and their thought process going into the budget. First we have looking to speak this evening is Councillor Walsh, and Councillor, the floor is yours. You're muted.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. First, I want to thank the mayor and his finance team who have worked diligently to make sure that city services are continued while we, as a city, cope with the fiscal problems caused by the pandemic. Simultaneously, as a city, we're also trying to address other issues such as racial inequality, food insecurity, and the like that go along with some of those problems. Last week, Police Chief Martineau addressed the issue of divestment of funds for police, or some people have called it defunding the police. As a criminal justice professor and a criminal justice professional, I have to say that cutting funding for the Fitchburg Police Department beyond what the cuts that have been made this evening or discussed this evening through attrition would be a mistake. In the 1970s, there was a move to close inpatient mental health facilities with the promise that we would then create community-based treatment centers for the mentally ill. We did the first part, but we didn't do the second part, which meant that people who were mentally ill had no place to go except to the streets. This has resulted in large part in making the police the first to be called to deal with mentally ill persons. We also have come to rely on the police to address drug and alcohol addiction and homelessness and many social problems, in addition to the duties that go along with enforcing the law. Although societal problems often do result in criminal behavior, they really are public health problems. I know that the Fitchburg Police are willing to deal with these issues, but what we really need is funding for social programs, treatment centers, and treatment professionals with whom police officers can work when a mentally ill, drug addicted, or homeless person comes to their attention. Chief Martineau is very frank in that we have room for improvement, and I know that the department is willing to work with the city to make such improvements. In the current budget, we may not be able to find extra money to fund such social programs or provide personnel to the degree that we would like. So we may have to look for more innovative ways to alleviate the difficulties with which we are currently faced, such as racial inequality, food insecurity, mental illness, drug and alcohol addiction, and homelessness, until such time as our budget allows more. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. I'll add, first, this budget represents a $7 million reduction in expenditures from last year. And, despite this unfortunate news presented this evening in the form of those reductions, I have to commend Mayor DiNatale and his team for their work on this. No one ever wants to hear that there's reductions in expenditures or in services. And the mayor is putting in front of us tonight a budget that, despite cuts, layoffs, positions remaining unfilled, it's a budget that keeps essential services intact without jeopardizing long-term fiscal stability of our city. So Mayor DiNatale, your finance team, you should be commended on this. And to dovetail with what Councillor Walsh just stated, in the wake of the slaying of George Floyd and the societal changes of the past 6 months, there's been calls to defund police. And I think Chief Martineau said it well in his letter to us. We must choose change carefully and implement that change critically. And while I believe that there is a crucial discussion happening now over reform at a national, state, and even local level, our budget is not the appropriate time or place for those discussions. If we were not in a budget crisis, however, I would expect for us to meet some of those calls by residents to better fund diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, and do so aggressively in our budget. Earlier this year, Councillor Walsh and I submitted a petition to explore how we address racial equity and economic empowerment disparities through the lens of our city's practices and policies, including, but not limited to, hiring, interning, appointing, and investment by our community in economic development. The Human Rights Commission has been reviewing that petition and making recommendations, and they'll soon be sending those back to us in the coming months. And while that work is ongoing, I think we need to make a commitment to understanding, studying, and remedying those disparities, discrepancies, and inequalities where we see them. We can do a better job of representing our city's population in the halls of government. We know that. Realizing the current budget situation, however, that there's no new funding that can be allocated, my expectation would be that we find ways and innovative ways to accomplish this through existing operations and budgets. And I'm confident that with the help and insight of our Human Rights Commission, we're going to be able to find a way to do that. And I know that the mayor is, I've spoken with the mayor about this as well. Additionally, I've said this for the past 7 years. We need to work to rebuild the ranks of our public safety offices, police officers in particular. At one time, we had 96 officers in our city. And I still feel strongly that we need to commit to hiring officers when we recover from this budget uncertainty. We were making slow, steady progress of rebuilding those ranks. And certainly this year is a disruption across police, DPW, and our fire department. And realizing that new hires won't be happening this year, how do we adhere to the spirit of rebuilding and reinvesting in our public safety departments? How can we provide more resources and assistance to police to help them continue the great work that they've done? They've lowered the crime rate, they've provided exceptional care and service to our community, all while being among the most diverse police forces in the entire Commonwealth. So over the year ahead, we'll be tightening our belt. we'll be finding ways of doing more with less. And despite the decline in funding, we can't let a good crisis go to waste. This is an opportunity that has been presented to us for more efficiencies, for continued cooperation, for better relationship building within our community, more resources for training, and hopefully a higher level of support from human and social services and state agencies alike. Chief Martineau has been an incredible advocate for diversion programs, drug courts, intervention systems, instituting anti-bias and de-escalation training. And so I look at this and say, what new collaborations will come next? Could we be the first to launch a pilot program in coordination with local service, social service providers to assist with drug intervention, domestic violence, homelessness, mental health related phone calls that alleviate the burden placed on police to do all things for all people, to allow our experts in law enforcement to enforce the law, while our experts in addiction, mental health, and domestic violence work in cooperation with law enforcement to address those. In short, I'd question, can greater cooperation lead to greater efficiencies? I certainly hope so. But at the end of the day, I don't think we can lose focus on what I started this aspect of the conversation on, which is our public safety departments. They're a crucial component of our municipal government. And when we return to a budgetary normal, whatever that normal is and whenever it may be, I hope that we meet that expectation. Earlier this evening, I asked a question about why we're leaving those numbers of full-time employees in. And it's my hope that it's with the expectation that in our budget, we return back to those funding levels and eventually surpass them. So I hope that we will honor our commitment to this community by reinvesting in public safety personnel at the appropriate time. And again, I want to thank Mayor DiNatale and the finance team for putting in front of us a responsible budget and a well thought out budget. And thank you again. With that, I have a number of councilors, starting with Councilor Zarella. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just since it seems to be the topic of conversation, I wanted to touch on our police force briefly. I think, as I believe I said a few meetings ago, it's important to realize that there isn't, pretty much never, a one-size-fits-all solution to problems in our nation. There are, without a doubt, certain police departments across the country that are profoundly broken. Ours is not one of them. We are not Minneapolis. We are not Ferguson. We're Fitchburg. We have an excellent police department that has excellent community relationships. So I concur that not only should we not be cutting any more from the police department than this budget crisis absolutely forces us to, but in fact, when we can do so, we need to be investing further in our police. And I agree, there are avenues that we can explore for non-police solutions to some of our social problems. But I think that given that we are a community that has an excellent and engaged police department, if we want to take some of the burden off of them for doing jobs that they are not optimally trained for, we should be asking them what the best way to alleviate that burden on them actually is. And I want to emphasize, I'm not saying any of this with the intention of making it a contradiction of anything my colleagues have said. I'm not implying that my colleagues necessarily disagree. I'm just supplying my own emphasis. I think that Chief Martineau has done an excellent job of addressing the social challenges in this city without simply making it an issue of being tough on crime or anything. I think he has a deep sensitivity to the actual social relationships in this city and is willing to learn whatever he doesn't know. So when we do sit down to discuss what we should be doing in terms of giving the police support in, say, mental health and domestic violence. The first person I'm going to be asking for comment on that is Chief Martineau, to tell me, what can we give you? What, where does your department need a hand? Because I don't know how to do his job better than he does. And I don't think any of us do. And I don't think any of us think we do either, but there it is. So we're Fitchburg, and we have to address the issues that we have with the resources that we have, and not try to be responsive to something that's happening halfway across the country that is undeniably an important issue, but not something that actually changes the situation on the ground in Fitchburg. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zarella. Next, we have Councillor Kuchar. The floor is yours.
First of all, I want to say that 2020 has been a year like no other. And Mr. Mayor and the finance team, you have gone above and beyond trying to get this pandemic under control, and I applaud each and every one of you. This has not been an easy year, and we're probably going to be seeing this into next year and probably the year after that. But I've taken a look at the budget, and it makes sense to me. And I applaud all your work. I'm sure it was not easy whatsoever. As for the police department, the Fitchburg Police Department is top notch. I have been in contact with Chief Martineau on a fairly regular basis, and they, despite the pandemic, they have been doing a phenomenal job. That being said, I don't see where social workers are going to be able to take the place of police officers. You're not going to be able to send a social worker in to deal with a 350-pound, 6'5" person that is, either on drugs or something like that, and send a social worker in to help. It's not gonna work. But our Fitchburg Police Department is top notch, and although these cuts hurt, I would like to see their budget go up exponentially once this pandemic is over. But Mr. Mayor, great job, and I'll be reviewing further.
Next, we have Councillor Boschman.
I'm not going to go back and say what Andrew said, Mr. Council Kuchar, because I'm not too pleased with the budget, although you did a pretty good job. I think we're making a big mistake. Again, I repeat, making a big mistake in cutting those two positions, the police department. I also believe that if we're going to change the city, that we need the police department and we need the DPW. Our city looks like hell. It's not, it doesn't look good at all.
Please use appropriate language.
And I was on my way to Leominster the other day. And what do I see on the side of the road? A guy at 6:15 in the morning, his front end fell apart on a fairly new car. Our roads are terrific. And I know we only get $1.2 million for the budget for roads. I understand that. But we're cutting the DPW. And we need the DPW to make the city look good. They did a job up in my ward on Clygon Street, and they cleaned it up. And I'll tell you, what looked like a bad neighborhood looks like a princess. It's really, really good looking. And if we have more employees, then we'd have a better city looking. I'm tired. I'm tired when I see cities around the area booming from an economic growth, and we are only getting scraps off the table. And I don't understand it. There's cuts we could have made some other departments. We're taking away people that are productive, and we're laying them off, and people that are not productive, and I see absolutely no change at all, we'll keep it. So I feel differently, and I'm going to make some cuts. Thank you, and you did a pretty good job, Mr. Mayor and Kelvin and all your team. I don't want to be that much negative, but I'm just saying. Thank you. That's it.
Next, we have Councillor Di Natale. The floor is yours.
So I believe I'm the longest serving counselor here. My first year was in 2008, and that was the worst year in city's modern history financially. So when I arrive at these budgets, I try to take a holistic and contextual view based on my years of experience going back to when we were deep in the recession of 2008. 12 years ago, we had $10,000 in the bank, and we were funding our budget through not free cash, anticipated free cash, meaning we didn't even have the money in hand. And then when the recession hit, it tanked us. So 12 years now, we've got $7 million in the bank in stabilization. And, you know, I look at the budget and I see that we use $2.1 million of free cash to balance it. $900,000 of that was for non-recurring expenses, so that's okay. The other 1.2 was to plug our revenue gaps, half of which was Great Wolf Lodge. That 1.2 million is where some may have pause in using it for this budget because you want to make sure you have it next year. And we're pretty confident we will. This is a national, global emergency. I point this out because people have to understand, if we didn't have that money available, does anyone think to themselves how much worse this thing would have looked? And the mayor has provided a proposal with attrition measures and layoffs and still needed 1.2 million to cover the loss, which tells everybody the loss was greater than that. If you add up all the positions through layoffs and attrition, it's about $600,000 to $700,000. That's before the free cash is used. So I would argue that the problem is really closer to 2 million if he didn't do those austerity measures. So the city should be thankful that we are in the position we're in, considering where we were 12 years ago, and the fact that we had reserves on hand to severely mitigate further layoffs in DPW, police, fire, and the rest. That's how I look at this. And I have to deal with it every day. And it's partly my fault because one of the good things about when I'm no longer doing this is I'm going to take a huge vacation off of social media. But, you know, you heard it earlier. The comments made about, we need more of this. We need more of that. If someone can find me the magical money tree, then I will be on board with sitting here and saying to everybody, we need more. Of course we need more. And I try to bring people back down to reality. I hope the residents watching will look at this budget, look at it, understand where your taxes are going. Because when people say to me their taxes go up and up and up, they have no concept of where the money's going. I asked earlier of Auditor Brooks, the 2.5% levy increase was $1.2 million. The increase in pension and health insurance alone is roughly $1 million. So you can say with confidence that 85% of your tax increase goes to those two items, not services, not adding payroll, to unfunded liabilities. Because the city was managed wonderfully many decades ago. So everyone wants more. I just had to hear it again about the roads and this and that. Do you know what does not get said? How are you going to pay for it? No one ever has that answer. It's easy to complain. It's easy to criticize. I can do it all day. If I don't have solutions, I'm just blowing hot air. And I talk frustratingly about it because I have to hear it every day. And I wish people would learn why it looks like this, why we have challenges. We just announced last week the fall paving schedule. What were the comments? Why aren't these roads getting done? No longer a comment of we don't pave roads. Oops, that defeated that narrative. So then it comes to why aren't these roads getting done? Oh, we're building a new Crocker Elementary School. We did $3 million at South Street, $3 million at Longshore. What's the comment? What about the rest of them? Because we're supposed to conjure up $300 million like it's chump change. And of course, I'll say it here because I have the floor. for the 9,000th time, the City Hall project has nothing to do with roads getting paved. Nothing. Zip. Okay? If City Hall weren't done, the roads wouldn't be done. But that's the convenient scapegoat. So I look at this from that holistic viewpoint where I was 12 short years ago. And I look at where we are today. And the fact that this thing would have been monumentally worse if we didn't have that free cash. So my suggestion to my colleagues on the council for the 22nd meeting in September, if you don't like what the mayor has proposed, put your cuts on the table. But I will caution you with this. He's already made several cuts. He's already provided several austerity measures. So when you're cutting the budget, you're not trying to move money somewhere else. You're cutting the budget that's already using free cash. So what are you going to accomplish there? If you cut money and move it to the police, then what do you do about the fire and the DPW? Or if you move it to DPW, what fire and police? You've got to do this across the board, which is what he attempted to do. I did some quick math. We're using 1.2 million in free cash. That could be a concern for some people. It was a concern of mine. But when I approached this, I had nothing, zero ideas of where I was going to get this. Because if you look at every page, where's the fat? Where is it? All the money is in police, fire, DPW, schools, which you can't touch, employee benefits, which you can't touch, debt service, curbside collection. So who's going to cut treasury? Who's going to cut city clerk? Veterans, human resources, police, fire, we're going to cut. So I did some rough math. If you were to institute a full 4% cut across every department in this package, outside of schools, debt service, curbside collection, employee benefits, and Monty Tech, that means you have to cut every other department by 4% if you want to make this equitable. Do you know what that would be if we didn't want to use that free cash? Just to exacerbate how big of a deal this is. We would have to cut 1.2 million from the budget. So what would that mean? 142,000 against the city council budget. $5,600 against the city council budget. $12,000 against city clerk. 5,000 election. 8,000 mayor. 6,500 HR. 11,000 legal. 15,000 assessor. It's going to get better. IT 28,000, Treasury 34,000. Here we go. Police $333,000. That, by my calculation, is 6 police officers. Who's going to put that on the table? Fire $317,000. 5 firefighters. Who's going to put that on the table? DPW $162,000. 4 laborers. Who's going to put that on the table? So it's not to scare the residents. It's to tell them that's where the money is. So I want people to really think about this. And I believe strongly that if people are educated and knowledgeable of this package, they will understand why things are the way they are. They don't have to like it. I just hope they understand it. Because we're not sitting on a pile of money and we're spending it haphazardly. Look at this page, this document. So I wanted to exacerbate the severity of the situation we're in and caution everybody for the 22nd, when you propose any cuts, you're going to have to say where you want those cuts to be applied to, and they're certainly not going to be applied equitably. And so when you have a $2 million shortfall that you had to use 1.2 million of free cash to plug, and you still had to cut positions and through austerity and layoffs, you're going to cut more? You're going to have to cut from positions that you may think are not necessary, but ask the department heads if they're necessary. So, because I can guarantee you, no one's going to propose cutting the police, fire, or DPW. So the cuts are going to come from those other areas that are much smaller, but have greater impacts. So please be mindful of that when you go through this and understand how this could have looked monumentally worse. And that's why I said earlier, the school department, we can't touch it. So everyone get that out of your mind. Can't touch the schools. Take it up with your state legislature. We can't touch them. So I thank the work that the team has done. And considering I am a glass half empty person and a pessimist, with my experience here 12 years ago, we would have dreamed for this 12 years ago. And it also doesn't help. I'm going to get in trouble for this, but I've done it before. That the union said, no dice, nothing. If they're not going to take a hit during a global pandemic, I don't know when they will. But a lot of those positions that we lost were because they didn't even want to entertain anything. Okay, then we lose the positions. I work for the private sector. You know how much say I get in what happens to me? Zippo, nothing. So that's it. We had to do what we had to do. And I thank you gentlemen and lady for the work you have done. It wasn't easy. And we should all be taking solace in the fact that because of good fiscal management in the past, it's why we were able to mitigate the risks so greatly now. And if people think that this is only from Fitchburg, you're really in a dream world. Every city and town in this country is going to be impacted by this, especially in the state of Massachusetts. When the state level funds local aid, that's a cut. It's a cut. So everyone's going to be impacted by this. The city next door, the land of utopia, they have school problems, far worse than we can even imagine. No one likes talking about that though, because they're the gold standard of the United States of America. Okay, so even utopia is impacted by this. So thank you for letting me go on that long-winded statement. And I look forward to discussing more in 2 weeks what we propose to do about what the mayor has submitted. And I'd be very interested to see what the proposals are, if any. Thank you very much.
Next, we have Councillor Schultz. The floor is yours. You are muted. Do that.
We're at 3 hours now. I guess I did have a few things to say, but I guess I'll pass and yield my time to Councilor Di Natale.
So Councillor Di Natale has already exhausted his. So you are the last person to speak, Councillor. So this is your opportunity. Otherwise, we can't.
I'll keep it very short. Then I'll just say that I want to thank Mayor Di Natale and the finance team for the fine job they did, and I also want to thank all the city departments for keeping the services going during the pandemic. They're to be commended, and that's all I have to say.
With that, I'd ask for a motion.
Make the motion, we adjourn.
I have a motion and second do I have a second?
Yeah,
Second.
second.
Motion and second to adjourn for the viewing public. Councilors have until Thursday, the end of day of Thursday, September 17th, to submit their cuts to the city clerk. She will notify department heads, the council, and the public of those cuts on the 18th. And we will take up the final budget orders and proposed cuts on the evening of Tuesday, September 22nd at 6 p.m. I have a motion and second to adjourn. We'll do this by unanimous consent unless there is objection from councilors. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.
Right.